then a third. Then the Oregon radar unbelievably reported that the object was decelerating. Allowing for deceleration, 3 successive predictions of its landing point agreed. The object, said these calculations, would come to Earth somewhere near Boulder Lake, Colorado, in what was to become a national park. Impact time should be approximately 8:14 a.m. These events followed Lockley's awakening in the wilds, but he knew nothing of any of them. He himself wasn't near the lake, which was to be the center of a vacation facility for people who liked the outdoors. The lake was almost circular and was a deep, rich blue. It occupied what had been the crater of a volcano millions of years ago. Already bulldozers had plowed out roads to it through the forest. Men worked with graders and concrete mixers on highways and on bridges across small rushing streams. There was a camp for them. A lakeside hotel had been designed, and stakes were driven in the ground where its foundation would eventually be poured. There were infant big-mouthed bass in the lake and fingerling trout in many of the streams. A huge wildlife control trailer truck went grumbling about such trails as were practical, attending to these matters. Yesterday, Lockley had seen it gleaming in bright sunshine as it moved toward Boulder Lake on the highway nearest to the station. But that was yesterday. This morning, he awoke under a pale gray sky. There was complete cloud cover overhead. He smelled conifers and woods mold and mountain stone in the morning. He heard the faint sound of tree branches moving in the wind. He noted the cloud cover. The clouds were high, though. The air at ground level was perfectly transparent. He turned his head and saw a prospect that made being in the wilderness seem entirely reasonable and satisfying. Mountains reared up in every direction. A valley lay some thousands of feet below him, and beyond it other valleys, and somewhere a stream rushed white water to an unknown destination. Not many waked to such a scene. Lockley regarded it, but without full attention. He was preoccupied with thoughts of Jill Holmes, and unfortunately she was engaged to Mary Vale, who was also working in the park some 30 miles to the northeast, near Boulder Lake itself. Lockley didn't know him well since he was new in the survey. He was up there to the northeast with an electronic survey instrument like Lockley's, and on the same job. Jill had an assignment from some magazine or other to write an article on how national parks are born, and she was staying at the construction camp to gather material. She'd learned something from Vale and much from the engineers while Lockley had tried to think of interesting facts himself. He'd failed. When he thought about her, he thought about the fact that she was engaged to Vale. That was an unhappy thought. Then he tried to stop thinking about her altogether, but his mind somehow lingered on the subject. At 10 minutes to 8, Lockley began to dress, wilderness fashion. He began by putting on his hat. It had lain on the pile of garments by his bed. Then he donned the rest of his garments in the exact reverse of the order in which he'd removed them. At 8 o'clock, he had a small fire going. He had no premonition that anything out of the ordinary was going to happen that day. This was still before the first Alaskan report. At 8:10, he had bacon sizzling and a small coffee pot almost enveloped by the flames. Events occurred, and he knew nothing at all about them. For example, the Military Information Center had been warned of what was later privately called Operation Terror, while Lockley was still tranquilly cooking breakfast and thinking, frowning a little, about Jill. Naturally, he knew nothing of emergency orders sending all planes aloft. He wasn't informed about something reported in space and apparently headed for an impact point at Boulder Lake. As the computed impact time arrived, Lockley obliviously dumped coffee into his tin coffee pot and put it back on the flames. At 8:13 instead of 8:14, this information is from the tape records, there was an extremely small